Welcome back. This is News Now on CNBC-TV18. Now, despite Mumbai being called the city of dreams, a recent report by the IndUS Entrepreneurs and Zinnov has found that Delhi-NCR is actually the place where startups are actually flourishing. This report goes on to say that Delhi-NCR has the most number of active startups in a country whose cumulative valuations accounts for more than 50% of all of India's startups. Earlier, my colleague Anu Sharma spoke with Rajan Anandan, who's the president of TIE Delhi-NCR, to better understand the key findings of this startup ecosystem report. Listen in.
TIE, as you know, is focused on fostering entrepreneurship and nurturing entrepreneurship and startups globally. And TIE Delhi-NCR, our mission is to really turbocharge and accelerate the ecosystem here in Delhi-NCR. So in that context, we undertook this very extensive study to both determine the current state of the ecosystem as well as identify the challenges and opportunities and what we need to do about it. So the report today that we launched, which is the very first Delhi-NCR startup report, really looks at the startup ecosystem in Delhi. And I'd say the single biggest finding is we have an extremely vibrant startup ecosystem. We have over 7,000 startups in NCR, more than any other city in India. We have 10 unicorns, more than any other city in India. And the startup ecosystem, on a private market valuation basis, is worth $50 billion. So I think the single biggest takeaway is we haven't really talked about this, we haven't really understood the magnitude of the ecosystem in Delhi-NCR, but we have a very large ecosystem that is also very broad-based, right? It's not just one sector, not just consumer internet or B2B SaaS. We actually have a very broad ecosystem that cuts across many different sectors.
So tell us about the current state of the startups which are there in Delhi-NCR vis-a-vis what it was maybe 10 years down the line, 15 years back or 10 years back. How is it different for startups now vis-a-vis what it was earlier?
So I think we've had a sea change in difference over the last, I'd say, even 4 or 5 years, right? But if you go back a decade ago, there were virtually, probably, you could count on 2 hands the number of startups that we had in Delhi-NCR, the way we define startups today, right? But today you have, as I said, over 7,000 startups. So we've got a large number of startups. They cut across every single sector, right? So, and I think this is the benefit of being in NCR, where it's not just about technology companies, it's about consumer product companies, it's about retailers and so on and so forth, the financial services companies, fintech companies. So the breadth, so the number has increased. It's gone dramatically. We didn't go back beyond 10 years, but if you look at it just from 10 years, it's gone up about 100 times in terms of active startups that we have. And the inflection point was around 2014 and 2015, and we've got this breadth. And we've built some very, very large companies, right? Whether it's Paytm, whether it's Oyo, and then companies that have gone public like InfoEdge and Make My Trip. So it is a sea change. It is, I moved to Delhi in 2005 from the US, and if I look at where the ecosystem was in 2005 and today, which was 14 years later, it's not even recognizable. It is so different, so large, and so dynamic.
And since it is so large and dynamic, there would also be certain challenges that startups across the country, and especially in Delhi-NCR, because it's right at the at the center of the national capital. So there would be some challenges that startups continue to face. Tell us about some of those challenges.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the most important objectives of this research was to understand the challenges that especially early stage startups in NCR face. And we've identified 4 or 5 very important challenges that need to be addressed. First is funding at all stages, right? From seed funding to Series A funding, etc. We need a lot more of that. That's actually a pretty big constraint. The second is technical talent. So NCR, because we don't have as many engineering colleges, we don't have as many computer science graduates, doesn't have as much technical talent. So that's another challenge that needs to be addressed. Space, right? If you're 2 co-founders starting up a company, or team of 3 or 4 people starting up, finding space is one of the first things that you do. And as we know, space in NCR is expensive, right? Especially in the central business districts of Delhi or Gurgaon or Noida, it's very expensive. So, none of these companies can afford to pay 10 or 15,000 rupees a seat per desk. So I think we don't have enough co-working spaces, and we don't have affordable available co-working spaces. So that's a big constraint. And I think the other big thing is, we haven't, the natural environment, right? Traffic, pollution, crime, those things don't help, right? But that's a broader topic than not tied to startups. But I would say those are really the challenges that we have. So the way that I look at this is, the pure entrepreneurial zeal that we have in NCR has really led us to this point. And now we need to start addressing some of these systematic challenges that we have. And that was the whole idea of the report.
Okay. And in terms of addressing these issues, are there some specific measures that you expect from the policy side in terms of easing the way of doing business for startups?
Yeah, no. So we've in the report, if you're interested in startups, you absolutely should get this report. It'll be online in the next hour or so. It's called Turbocharging the Delhi-NCR Ecosystem. Maps out what we think needs to be done in terms of recommendations, right? We've identified 10 priority sectors, right, that we think NCR can really win big time on, right? And what we mean by that is that a significant percentage of the startups in that particular sector will actually come from the NCR region, right? So they range from consumer internet, where we have a large mass of companies, to consumer products. We have several hundred very, very interesting startups in the CPG sort of space, to food and food tech, next generation e-commerce, which is really video, social and vernacular driven sort of e-commerce, financial services, logistics. We actually have 2 unicorns in the logistics space. So we've mapped out 10 different sectors, and what we are recommending is that in each of these sectors to actually have very specific initiatives, right? Some of them are things like centers of excellence that need to be sort of government, public-private partnerships where we set those up. Other states have them, in the dozens. We don't have a single one actually in our region. And then also having sector-specific policies. So for instance, smart cities, we've identified as one of the priority sectors. We are recommending that we set aside a region of about, pretty significant region, but it'll be only 2% of the landmass in NCR, where you can actually launch new technology solutions, be it water, waste management, traffic management solutions like that, with sort of a adjusted regulatory framework where you can launch fast, you can iterate, you can learn, right? Because having these sandboxes becomes very, very important. And then if you look at mobility as a service, right? I mean, NCR should be not just India's #1 capital for mobility as a service, it should be the global capital of mobility as a service. And to do that, we need to have favorable and market-shaping regulations, right? Carpooling is not allowed. I mean, Delhi should, and Gurgaon and Noida should love carpooling, right? Carpooling is the way we should go. We've got a huge traffic problem, right? It's a model that's proven around the world. How do we do that, right? Sharing of commercial vehicles, how do we do that? So in each of these 10 sectors, right, what we are recommending is that we be very, very thoughtful about what private sector can do, what government can do, and most importantly, how can we set up these sandboxes, what we're calling sandboxes, both physical sandboxes for things like smart cities as well as digital sandboxes, right, where you can really just launch fast and iterate, right, because that's one of the challenges in these very disruptive spaces is it's very difficult to find a place where you can actually launch.
Right. Coming to my last question, how's the current state of economy affecting the startups in Delhi-NCR?
Look, I think first and foremost, it's important that India is now the second largest or third largest, number 2 or number 3 in terms of global startup nations, right? So there's US and then China and then us and then UK sort of somewhere in there. So startups in general, I mean, if I look at the last decade, we've seen a sea change in the startup ecosystem, the Indian startup ecosystem. In this research, you'll see what's happened in the Delhi-NCR ecosystem. And I think the current government has been very, very progressive when it comes to startups, right? The Startup India initiative, we think, made a very big difference. And I think the most important thing that this government has done is building out what we call the India stack, right? It's Aadhaar, it's UPI, it's account aggregator, it's all these things. Actually, I think 20 or 30 years from now, we're going to look back and say that India created these mega global companies because of these infrastructure layers that were built by the Indian government. So for instance, if you look at digital payments, India is leading the way in digital payments because UPI enabled anybody, you and I can go launch a new payments product, right? And unlike many other countries where you have these closed-walled payment systems, which actually doesn't really foster and encourage innovation. So I think in general, it's very, very positive. Now, that being said, as you see in the report, I think the startups would like more help, right? They would like more clear regulation in some of these disruptive areas. And I think also I think states, especially states, part of it is the central government, but coming back to the Delhi-NCR startup report, Delhi, Gurgaon and Noida, we think can do a lot more and should do a lot more to encourage, foster entrepreneurship, right? We should build startup hubs in each of these cities, 10,000 seaters, where you can actually, have affordable world-class quality working spaces, right? We should do a lot more in terms of developing our technical talent base in the region. So, there's a number of things that can be done. But look, we're in a fantastic place. But in many ways, we're still in day one of the startup ecosystem. And there's a lot more that can be done.
Okay, with that, we take a short break, come back, and we talk about Apple. All you fanboys, the company is set to launch next.